There
There you go.
you go. Welcome, everybody. This is the DVMUG Zoom meeting for Tuesday. This is June 22nd, and we have a very special guest today. Jason Snell was the former editor of Macworld and now runs sixcolors.com, correct?
That's right.
Welcome, Jason.
Thank you. I was here a year ago on this very Zoom, and I'm going to do a version of that, except updated for what happened this year. Apple's developer conference was a few weeks ago. They made some news. I'm going to talk about it a little bit. Hopefully I can give you a little bit of perspective about what was going on there if you weren't following it too closely. And then at the end, we can do some questions and answers. They're always good questions from this group. So, and sometimes I have answers and sometimes I don't. So Apple Status Report 2021 edition. Before I get to WWDC, I wanted to mention the, obviously the first two waves of the M1 Macs are out. A year ago when we were here, we knew that Apple Silicon was going to be a thing, but we didn't have any examples of Apple's hardware with, or Mac hardware with Apple chips in it, but we do now. The first wave, of course, last fall with the Mac Mini, the MacBook Air, and the low-end 13-inch MacBook Pro, but this spring we got what I was just holding up a minute ago, 24-inch M1 iMac. I think a great time to be buying Mac hardware, that the M1 is so much more capable in so many ways than the existing previous generation Intel hardware was for these computers. I recommend them in general, unless you've got some very specific issues. They have limited multi-monitor support, sort of one or 1.5 extra monitors out there. If you are running Windows and emulation, it's not going to work. And if you're running really super high-end pro stuff, that you're probably using a higher powered computer than the ones that Apple's still selling Intel versions of, because they haven't replaced them yet. I have an iMac Pro here, and as much as I really enjoy my M1 MacBook Air, there are some audio plugins that I run that use multiple processor cores and are not yet updated for Apple Silicon. They're still running in Rosetta, and they're really slow. So for me, I'm not ready to throw away my iMac Pro just yet, but for so many things that I do, and I think that most people do, the M1 computers are pretty fantastic. And what Apple did with Rosetta 2 to maintain compatibility, like I expected there to be way more issues with stuff not working quite right on M1, and it hasn't been the case. It's actually, they did a remarkable job in making it work pretty much seamlessly, even if in fact, to the point where I see things get announced like we're finally native on M1, and I think, were you not before? Because I used that app and it was just fine. I guess it's faster now, so that's great. But like, so much that you didn't even really notice. And that's I think the best kind of processor transition you can ever have is the one that doesn't really get noticed by anybody. It just sort of happens and everything still seems fine, and you're just using your Mac and it's all okay. So also the new iPad Pro came out with that also has that M1 processor in it, which is interesting. It's very good, but it's not cheap. And you buy the big one and add the cellular and get 2 terabytes of storage, and you've spent more than $2,000 on an iPad then. So that seems like a lot, but it is that same chip, and it really has, other than limitations of iPad OS versus Mac OS, it can do the same stuff in terms of the power that's available to it. So just to reset, since that's where we were, like on the precipice last year, I want to talk about WWDC and what we learned about where Apple is going and where Apple is taking all of its platforms, where the Mac and iPad and iPhone especially are going. And my big picture thought about it after it was all over was that Apple seems to have finally done what it's been working at for a long time, which is getting its platforms in sync. So I don't know if you paid attention to these developer conferences, or if you paid attention to the software releases in the fall, it felt like for a long time that the Mac was kind of an afterthought, that the iPad was out and the iPhone was growing so fast that so much effort was being put into those products, and the Mac, they would introduce new features and then they wouldn't be on the Mac, or they would mostly not work on the Mac, or they would show up on the Mac 2 years later and maybe still mostly not work. And as a Mac user, that was always really disappointing. Like, it was really cool that they were doing these things for the iPhone and the iPad, but the Mac seemed to be sort of not a priority for them. And what has happened is that Apple has spent the last few years doing some interesting things, including, if you remember back when the iPhone was announced, they said it runs OS 10. That was actually a thing that they said because they wanted to emphasize that the iPhone was not running on some sort of like simplified derivative operating system that was like the iPod ran on a weird operating system that Apple licensed. But this was like they were using the fundamental Unix kind of underneath of OS 10 on the iPhone, and so iOS has evolved over the last decade plus, based on a lot of the same structures as the Mac, but the Mac and iPhone and iPad kind of evolved differently over the last decade, really, to the point where one of the things Apple had to do, I think 2 or 3 years ago when they did their OS release, one of the things that they said that they did was something that was going to be invisible, but it would be important later. And it was realigning all of the kind of fundamental stuff across all those operating systems, because they'd all kind of drifted apart a little bit, and they wanted to put them all back together where you could sort of say that whatever this thing was, this fundamental underlying part of iPhone and iPad and Mac was all the same part, and not like the Mac version that had drifted for 5 years and the iPhone version that had drifted this way for 5 years. They kind of put all that stuff together. They got rid of 32-bit apps. They introduced Catalyst, which is this tool that lets you write an app, take an app for the iPad and put it on the Mac. And that's a big deal for some developers, but it's also who want to, they have access to the Mac with their stuff that otherwise wouldn't run on the Mac. But it's a big deal for Apple because it means that Apple doesn't have to introduce a new app and write it twice, once for iOS and once for Mac OS. They can write it once and build it for both. And then last year they introduced Swift UI, which is another tool for people who are writing software, not just third-party developers, but for Apple itself, to design interfaces that scale from the watch to the phone to the iPad to the Mac. And this year at the developer conference, you see all of those decisions paying off, because almost everything Apple announced is just on the Mac and the iPhone and the iPad, not lots of asterisks and footnotes about like, well, it's on the Mac, but not really. It's on the Mac just a little bit, or it'll be on the Mac next year, but it's not there. No, it's just there. And when they do a new app, so they redesigned shortcuts this year and brought it to the Mac. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but they built that new version of shortcuts in Swift UI. So rather than build a Mac variant of shortcuts or bring shortcuts over via Catalyst, what they did is they built a new shortcuts interface using a tool that allowed them to build that interface and run it on the iPhone, the iPad, and the Mac. Regardless, it's just sort of the one version works across all of them. And they've been, I think as somebody who writes about this, we talk about it in terms of apps a lot, like third-party apps. But a lot of the reason Apple does this really is to make its own life is easier. Like, Apple doesn't want to have to write the same app twice every time it does a new app. It really doesn't want to do that, but it also doesn't want the Mac to lag behind. And so I feel like this year, the big story was that by the time they got to the Mac section of the keynote, they had to hold some stuff back because they'd literally already announced huge numbers of features that run on the Mac, because they are the same features that run on the iPhone and the iPad. And that's going to be a challenge for them. If I was making their slides for their keynotes, I would consider that a challenge going forward, is that how do you differentiate between these platforms when the features you roll out are for all of them? Otherwise, you get to the Mac and you're like, we have nothing to say about the Mac. We already told you all those things. They're on the Mac too.
What do you see as the downside of that, Jason? Does that dumb down Mac apps?
It's a good question. I don't think it necessarily does. I think that if you look at what is possible, it allows Apple to build variations that scale from the iPhone up to the Mac and go through the iPad along the way. And honestly, the alternative was that what was happening in the 2010s was they just wouldn't show up on the Mac, or they would show up in a way that was kind of broken, now they just are there and they work. And I think that with something like shortcuts, you're seeing that Apple's, maybe something like the Home app, when it brought over via Catalyst early on, before Catalyst even had a name, is not a great example. Although honestly, it's not a great iPad app either, and it's not a good Mac app. But if you look at something like shortcuts, they didn't even use Catalyst for that. They used Swift UI, and then they used some very specific programming methodology on the iPad and on the Mac that was separate, but they did as much of it as they could in this one place. And it's a much better app for it. So I think it's an evolution in progress, and Apple is evolving this every year too as they build this stuff. But I'm really encouraged by it, and especially as a Mac user, I like the fact that, when they introduced iMessage effects like 5, 6, 7 years ago, and on the Mac until last year with Big Sur, somebody would send you a message and it would just say in text at the bottom of it, "Sent with lasers." Because there were no lasers, because they didn't build that feature into the Mac where you could have like little laser beams fly around on your message, which is silly, but it also said something about the fact that the Mac was just sort of not going to get that feature, and didn't really get it until Messages was converted, and sort of they threw out the Mac version of Messages and turned it into a Catalyst version. And now it has all those features. And you see that this year. I'll talk about FaceTime in a little bit. And you see it in there too, like FaceTime. So these features: FaceTime, Share Play, Messages, Safari, Notes, Focus Mode, Maps updates, Photos updates, Translation, Spatial Audio, Dictation, Shortcuts. These are all big features that they announced for iPhone and iPad, and they're all there on the Mac in macOS Monterey as well. And I think that's I think it's really good. I think it's really good for the Mac to not be left behind and to be able to participate. And I think you can see Apple not wanting to just toss it off to the Mac, but actually make it good on the Mac. All right, I want to get into some details of the stuff that they announced. Safari is where I'm going to start, and this is a tough one because there's a new version of Safari that will be rolling out in the fall to Mac, iPhone, and iPad. And I have the beta versions here that I've been running for the last week or two. My instant reaction to Safari 15, as they call it, is that it's got a lot of problems. I think I'm hopeful that Apple is aware that there are issues with it and that they may actually make changes over the summer. They've got, they can inflict bad decisions on people during the beta testing process in the summer, but that's not the same as inflicting those bad decisions on everybody else in the fall. But it does have a lot of problems. They made a decision to merge the tabs and the address bar at the top to sort of collapse it into a single thing. The color at the top is now inherited from the web pages you visit. So if you visit a blue page, the whole top of the screen is blue. If you visit a red page, the whole top of the screen is red. It has a lot of issues. And without going on too much of a rant, I don't think the tabs are very legible. They're too narrow because they're crammed into a small amount of space. The color issue makes it even less legible. I don't really see why on a 27-inch display I really need to take that 2 rows of Chrome on the top of the browser and collapse it into one and make everything illegible. I don't really understand that. Anyway, there's some interface issues with Safari that I hope they fix. There's actually a good feature that I like the idea of, but I think the way it's implemented is really bad, which is Safari on the iPhone now has the address bar at the bottom. And the idea there is that phones are so big now that forcing everybody to reach up to the top in order to control Safari is bad. And so now it's down there on your thumb. And the best part about it is you can swipe left and right and sort of go through the tabs on your on Safari on your iPhone, which nobody uses tabs on Safari on their iPhone now because you got to tap that little button and then they all kind of zoom back. And I just feel like it's an invisible interface. And this is really nice. It has a bunch of issues, like the little address bar floats over the content of a web page, so it can obscure content on the page. That's not great. It's got, what's the other problem? Oh, you tap on it to enter a new URL in, and then the keyboard slides up, and that means the thing slides up. So you're sort of like playing where did it go with, which is, I think, an interface problem. I'm not quite sure what the solution is there. So there's a bunch of stuff in Safari that I think has made a lot of people cranky, and rightfully so. And I'm hopeful that Apple's going to back off on it or provide a preference or to turn it off or something, because it's kind of a mess, and it actually makes me want to not use Safari, especially on the Mac, actually. But there's some good stuff in there too. They have this feature called tab groups, and I've heard a lot of people say, how is this not like bookmarks? Isn't it just bookmarks? And it's not. Tab groups is like, if you've ever used iCloud tabs, the idea that you can see what tabs are open in Safari on your Mac when you're on your iPad. Tab groups is that, but you can create as many groups as you want, and they all sync automatically across all your devices. So if you normally keep 90 tabs open in your browser, or maybe you've got like 5 browser windows, each of which has a bunch of tabs open in them, you can simplify and set up a bunch of different groups that have a bunch of tabs in them and switch between them just with a quick, couple of taps or clicks. And I'm just checking. There's a question about audio dropouts. Everybody okay?
No, I'm getting lots of files and freezes.
I'm not.
All right. It is a lot of people too. Well, I'm just going to keep plowing ahead then. So tab groups. So the idea there is that you can organize your tabs in groups. It's like it says. But for me, what makes it really interesting is it's all happening live. So instead of, if you think about bookmarks are permanent. They're what they are. Tab groups aren't like that. Tab groups, if you close one, it disappears from the group. If you add one, it adds to the group. If you move between pages in that tab, the group updates. But I think it's really got a lot of possibility. The idea that you have these groups and they exist on all your browsers. So basically all of your browsers on all your Apple devices have those groups available, and you can pick up on one device where you left off in the other. I think it's a really clever idea. The other big idea in Safari is iCloud Private Relay. And the idea there is, if you're paying for iCloud storage, you get iCloud Private Relay. And what it does is it obscures your location and your IP address for every bit of traffic that passes through Safari, as well as every bit of unencrypted web traffic on your device. And it works by going through an Apple server and then going through a second server. And each of those 2 servers doesn't know all the information about what you're doing. And so the idea is it's giving you complete privacy and not allowing you to be profiled based on what internet address that you're using. And if you're like me, you probably have your, my Comcast IP address basically never changes. So if somebody figures out, matches me to my IP address when I'm logged in at a website somewhere, they got me. They fingerprinted me. And with iCloud Private Relay, that's no longer the case. You're going through a relay server. It's not quite a VPN, but it's kind of like that, in that they don't really know who you are unless you tell them. And I think that's a very interesting feature. There are a lot of people who give Apple money for iCloud. And so in the fall, it's going to really be interesting to see how Apple is going to manage to keep its servers running when a huge influx of people start using iCloud Private Relay. But I think it really fits with Apple's whole approach to security and privacy. Okay, what else do I want to talk about? I want to mention user automation on the Mac. If you have used AppleScript or Automator, Apple announced this big user automation transition. I'm really excited about it. They're bringing shortcuts to the Mac, which I mentioned earlier. Shortcuts is great. It's very powerful. It does a lot of things on iPad and iPhone that are much harder to do on the Mac. They're not impossible to do on the Mac, but they're much harder. found myself implementing shortcuts on that I built on the iPad, building the equivalent on the my Mac, and it was actually much harder. So shortcuts is a good system. I would say it's really the logical successor to Automator. It does it's been updated in macOS Monterey this fall. When it comes out, it's been updated from the iOS version to do everything that Automator could do. You can actually import Automator actions and they will open in shortcuts, and it should be able to do them. All those actions are also now available or will be this fall with iPadOS 15 on the iPad and the iPhone. So shortcuts actually gets more powerful on iPhone and iPad thanks to the Automator support that they added on the Mac side. There are a few things that shortcuts doesn't do on iPad that it does on the Mac. They have to do with things that aren't available on the iPad, like shell access, terminal access, and AppleScript. But all the other stuff it does. And that's actually one of the brilliant things about shortcuts on the Mac is that it is not hobbled in any way by Apple. It will run Apple scripts. It will run Perl scripts. It will run shell scripts. It will run Python scripts. It'll do any of that stuff. It will. So you can run a shortcut from the command line, and you can run an Apple script from within shortcuts, and you can run a shortcut from within Apple script. It all works together. They've integrated shortcuts into all the places where Automator used to live. So it's and Automator's still there for now. It's probably going to go away in a year or two, but it's in the Finder it's in the services menu. There's a menu bar item. Like they really have done all the right things. And while the first beta version of it in the developer beta of Monterey is it's buggy because it is a brand new app, super promising. And I think by the end of the summer, it's going to be really fantastic. I was able to take one of my shortcuts that I did on the iPad because they sync using iCloud. So they were already there on my test Mac when I went to it, and I ran it. First time I ran it to see, will this work on the Mac? And I didn't touch it. I didn't make a single change to it, and it worked perfectly. So that was really exciting too, because it's not one of those cases where, oh, well, you can bring them over to the Mac, but you've got to do all this work to make it more like the Mac. No, it just actually worked right out of the box. And yes, you can actually write shortcuts that say, is this a Mac? If it is, do this. If it's an iPad, do that. And that will also work. So you can have universal shortcuts that run across all your devices. Big multitasking stuff on the iPad as well was announced. There's a little three dot icon that's going to go at the top of every kind of window on the iPad. And if you tap on it, you can say, put this in full screen, put this in slide over, put this in, split view. You can control those via keyboard shortcuts, which you never used to be able to do. There's this whole globe. There's the globe key in the bottom left corner of a lot of Apple's keyboards, including the iPad Magic Keyboard. Apple in iPadOS 15 has added all these keyboard shortcuts on the globe key, and they're all system-wide shortcuts, really encouraging and including controlling multitasking. So they're thinking a lot about this. There's a new style for like a big window that floats over the center that they're using in Mail. If you hold down the globe key or you hold down the command key, it brings up a list of commands. There's a version of that in iPadOS 14, but in iPadOS 15, if you do it, it doesn't just show you commands like you can use with a keyboard, but it shows you like file, edit, like these categories of commands that are basically Mac menu bar categories, except sort of inverted and at the bottom of your iPad. It's unusual, and I think it's an interesting direction. I think Apple is edging the iPad closer and closer to being even more Mac-like down the road. And they added other iPad improvements. They're going to add App Library, which was added to the iPhone last year, and widgets, which previously could only live on screen number one, kind of on the side, can kind of go anywhere on the iPad. I think FaceTime got a huge overhaul. This is the what did we learn about the pandemic update to FaceTime, which is that why did everybody use Zoom? I do a family Zoom, and it's all Apple devices, and we still use Zoom and not FaceTime for multi-video. I use FaceTime a lot on one-on-ones, but I don't do it a lot for groups. And I think Apple had some real soul searching about why FaceTime just didn't measure up. So they're trying to improve it. They added invitation links, all these things we know from Zoom, right? They're invitation links that you can share on the web. They added a grid view. So instead of it being like little floating bubbles that float around in space, you can get a grid view like you can in Zoom or WebEx or anything like that. It supports Windows and Android via a web browser. You can't start a FaceTime on Windows or Android, but you can join a FaceTime chat that an Apple device using user has created by following a link. It just opens in a web browser on Android or on Windows. There's portrait mode support. So that's Apple's answer to like green screen or fuzz out your background features in Zoom. They added this portrait mode that fuzzes out the background, sort of like it does on the iPhone, but it also works on the Mac if you're using a Apple Silicon Mac anyway. And they even added these new audio modes that like try to focus on your voice, so that if you're in a noisy area, they'll do a lot of aggressive denoising to make your voice clear. And then they also added this broad spectrum mode, and you may have seen it if you watch the keynote, but the idea there is like if you're at a recital or something, you know, you want to share your kid singing at their recital or playing the piano or whatever to the people on the other end. Video chat isn't made for that kind of audio. It's designed for just for voice. And so they added a mode that basically does the broad spectrum audio and says, no, I want you to get the whole sense of the scene and not just hear my voice. And so that'll sound better too, which I thought was a really clever feature. And then they added this thing called SharePlay, which on its face is watch movies with friends over FaceTime, which people actually did during the pandemic, and I think will still do who are far flung, but it's a little more than that. It lets apps sync up. It lets people see the same thing and control something together. So like you can all listen to the same music if you have Apple Music, and different people can pause or go to the next track or even add music to the to-do list, which is pretty clever. And you can share your own screen. And yes, you can watch movies and TV shows on it, and other apps can support it. So I think that there is a lot more potential here for sort of people sharing information with other people using FaceTime. And will it make FaceTime the next Zoom? I don't think so, but they are trying to make it that FaceTime at least is in the conversation, and that when people use FaceTime, they don't get frustrated and go back to Zoom. And so I was impressed by that. A couple other big ideas from Apple, this thing called focus mode that they added. And if you've used do not disturb, focus mode is like super do not disturb, but you can customize and you can make as many different modes as you want. So instead of it just being regular and do not disturb, you can create different focus modes that do different things. And a focus mode can be based on a time, or you can just control it yourself. And you get to choose what apps notify you when you're in that mode. What people will you receive messages from in that mode? And you can even do stuff like turn the pages of your home screen on and off. So I have friends who are very excited by this because they can have kind of like a work mode where all the work people get through and the work apps show on an app screen. And then they go out of that mode and then go into a personal mode, and the work people can't get through and only their friends can get through, and the work apps disappear from their home screen and new apps come in that are just the stuff that they use in their spare time. And you have a lot of control over that. So Apple's trying to give people a little more control over when they get notified and what apps they see, and sort of like the idea of saying in certain contexts, like for me, I created one that's a writing context, which is basically like, unless it's a member of my family, I don't want to hear when I'm writing, I don't want to hear from them. And I don't want anybody to notify me except maybe like this one app that I use with my editor, something like that. And you can do that all in focus mode. And maybe the best thing about focus mode, if it works, I haven't really tried this yet, it's not quite working right, is it syncs across all your devices. So if you imagine saying, don't bother me on your Mac, and then your iPad or your iPhone chimes at you because they're bothering you and it's not coming through on your Mac, but it's still coming through on your phone. With focus mode, if you go in focus mode and say, don't bother me, all your Apple devices go into focus mode, and they know that they're all following the same rules about what to do. And so in theory, you will not be bothered across all your devices when you're in that mode. And you can say, if you forget to turn it off, for example, you don't have to enter until you exit. You can say, put me in this mode for an hour, or put me in this mode until the end of the current event on my calendar, and which is kind of like do not disturb. But so that I thought is really great. I can say I'm gonna put my head down and focus for an hour on writing, and then that mode will end and I'll go back to normal notifications when I'm done. And so that's a big idea from Apple. We'll see. It's all in the details of how they implement it, but I'm encouraged by that. I think it's a nice extension of do not disturb to let people customize it a little bit more. And then a bunch of things that I'll cover really quickly. There's a thing called Quick Note that on the Mac is, you press a keyboard shortcut and a note from the Notes app shows up and you can type in it. It's not that exciting. On the iPad, though, you do that. You use the control center, or you swipe, or you press a keyboard if you're using a keyboard with your iPad, and a Notes window floats up, and it's just floating above whatever you're doing. It's like, it's not multitasking, but it kind of is multitasking. And lets you take a note, and it also knows what app you're using. And like if you're in Safari, it'll let you make a link to the page that you're viewing. It's very contextual. On the Mac, like I said, I think it's a little less exciting, but on the iPad, it's really interesting because they want you to be able to take notes in context on something that you're watching in a different app. And Quick Note lets you do that. I think it's on the iPad especially, I think it's going to be really good. I read a book about the Photos app that I have to update every summer, and they made a bunch of changes to the Photos app, including when you get a new device and you go to the Photos app and there's nothing there because it has to sync iCloud photos. Apparently that's going to be a lot faster now, which is so great because that was a huge problem. You had to wait days for your photo library to show up. You're going to be able to import other libraries on the Mac. So if you've got like a second photo library, you used to have to buy like a third-party utility to merge those together. Or do a very weird series of things where you logged into iCloud and then you logged out and then you logged in again with a different library. Like you can just merge those libraries together now, which is good. They have this memories feature, which they're making more interactive, where they're trying to use machine learning to float pictures up to you and say, oh, hey, remember this trip you took, or remember this event you had. And somebody at Wired, I think, wrote an article last year about how the problem with that is she had a long engagement and then basically broke off the wedding right before the wedding. And Photos was constantly wanting to show her pictures of her engagement stuff that she didn't get married. And Photos is adding a feature called Suggest Less Often, which actually lets you click on any memory, and it gives you a list of all the things that are kind of in that memory, and you can say, I don't want to see that person, I don't want to see this event, I don't want to see this location. And that, I think, is really smart as a way of training these automatically generated things about the stuff that you don't want to see, because that was definitely, I think that a lot of people, not all the photos in your photo library are photos you actually want to see. And so being able to train the Photos app to do that is a good thing. Another few quick things. Universal control is a feature that I never even imagined, but it seems pretty cool, where you can set an iPad and a Mac together, or you can set two Macs together, or you can actually do up to 3 devices. And it's essentially keyboard and mouse sharing. So you can move your mouse off the side of your iMac screen and it pops open in the iPad that's sitting next to it. And it's not like Sidecar where your iPad turns into a Mac monitor. It's still your iPad running iPad software, but your keyboard and mouse on your Mac now can also, when they're over, I don't even know how to describe it. If you've seen the video, it's like, it's still an iPad, but it's also controllable by your keyboard and trackpad. It's a wild idea, but if you're somebody who uses 2 Macs side by side, or a Mac and an iPad side by side, or some other combination like that, universal control will let you only use like one keyboard and mouse if you want. and just move it across the devices, and all the devices
KVM.
know where
It's a
they are.
KVM.
It is
Pulse.
kind of like a KVM that you don't have to switch.
Pushed up.
because
Exactly.
like a multiple monitor setup, that's basically what it is. It's like a keyboard switcher, keyboard and input device switcher combined with multiple monitor support on a Mac. So it knows the geography, but what you're doing is when you move the cursor off of the left side of your screen, it's moving the cursor on the device to your left. It starts moving that, and it sort of switches over to that device while the cursor's over there. And then you move it back, and you can even like copy and paste and drag and drop and do all these things that you can do with like iCloud Clipboard and an AirDrop and things like that. But instead, it's sort of making it visual if you've got multiple devices in front of you. And I often have a Mac and an iPad together, and I don't want to use Sidecar because I like that it's an iPad, but it's awfully nice to not have sort of like two sets of keyboards and mice or trackpads in order to drive those two devices. Because also I forget, right? And I'm like, oh no, I used the wrong keyboard. I typed in the wrong place because I wasn't on that device. I was on this device. So I think for people who use multiple Apple devices together, that's going to be a really interesting, fun and good feature. And then I guess the last big feature that I wanted to mention is messages. Apple is really trying hard to put the data that you get in via text or via iMessage in other apps, or at least other Apple apps. So if people suggest links to you, they show up in Safari. If they suggest news stories to you, there's a from your friends area in the news app. If people send you pictures, they will show up in the Photos app, and then you can choose to add them to your library. They're kind of not in your library, but they're in the app. It's really an interesting idea. It's of course only Apple apps, which I think is frustrating if you use non-Apple apps for this stuff. But basically, Apple's trying really hard to unearth the stuff that people send you in messages and put it in other contexts. The idea there that, instead of if somebody sends you a link to a website, instead of going back to messages and trying to remember who it was and when they did it, you could go to Safari, and there's a little like from your friends thing on the Safari start screen, and the recent links that you were sent in messages will be there, which is like, if that works right, and that's an open question, that has some potential, I think, to make it easier to find this stuff. And because you're not thinking of that photo they sent, you're probably more likely to think of that photo they sent in the context of the Photos app. Like, oh, did I take that picture, or did someone send that to me? By being in that context, being able to see the photo that somebody sent to you of when you went to the baseball game together, and then be able to add that to your library. It's an interesting idea. And and really quick translation across the interface. It's really great. You can select text and say, translate this. It translates it in line, sort of in any app, which is amazing. You can translate things people send to you. You can type something and then select it and say, translate this, and it turns it into the other language you select. So that I've been waiting for that feature for like 5 years. I'm so happy they finally did it. And a bunch of new health stuff, especially on the iPhone, where they're adding this walking steadiness feature, which basically does gait analysis of you as you walk, and warns you if you might be if you might be a little bit shaky, and warns you to like watch out that you might have an issue that will lead to you potentially falling later, which is a big deal. And I think a good move by Apple to try to use all those sensors in that iPhone to figure out other ways to keep people safe. And then before I open it up for questions, I just wanted to do a quick thing about hardware, because everybody always wants to know about future Apple hardware, and nobody actually knows because Apple doesn't talk about it. But I think the big question is what happens next with Apple Silicon Macs, because all we've had are these M1 Macs. And what's next? A lot of rumors out there. I think clearly the easiest way to play this game is to say, what has Apple not turned into an Apple Silicon Mac yet? And what's going to happen there? So like the 16-inch MacBook Pro and the higher end 13-inch MacBook Pro are still sitting there on Apple.com with Intel processors in them. There are rumors that those are coming, that they may be coming very soon. There are lots of supply constraints due to the pandemic. A lot of like parts that are not available that Apple has said has slowed their ability to ship Macs and iPads both. So we'll see when they actually come, but I feel like those are going to be next on the agenda. There's a lot of discussion of that. Probably with a new chip, whether they call it the M2 or the M1X, it's marketing really, but it remains to be seen, but more capable, because the M1s are, we all know they're all the same speed. That Mac Mini, that iPad Pro, the iMac, like they're all M1. They all have the same capabilities. And these higher end laptops and other devices need probably more processor cores, more power than those devices that were the first ones out the door. So the rumor is a new 16-inch MacBook Pro replacing that high-end 13-inch with a 14-inch model. The rumor is also that they would have the mini LED display, which is an extended dynamic range, very bright, beautiful display like they have on the M1 iPad Pro, the 12.9-inch version. It is a gorgeous display. If they could do that on a Mac laptop, people would really love it. I think that would be a hit product for them. There's still an Intel Mac Mini on the price list, and I view its presence there as a hint that they're probably going to do a version of the Mac Mini with this more powerful processor and not just the M1 that they already have there. And then there's the longer horizon, which is literally play the game of what's left. It's the larger iMac, the 27-inch iMac. We've seen what they did with the small iMac, going from 21.5 to 24 and putting in Apple Silicon. I would imagine we're going to see a similar, pretty dramatic transition for the larger iMac. Will it get bigger? The rumors are that it might. As somebody with an iMac Pro right here, I would love to see that computer, because I might buy that one. That would be very exciting. And then the Mac Pro is out there, which, at some point they're going to have to make the rumors are, 20 core, 40 core Apple Silicon Mac Pro, but that may take a while. That might be a year or more before we see that. But those laptops and I really hope the larger iMac comes this year too, but that's what's out on the horizon. So that's what Apple is up to and we'll be working on this summer, and that they're going to be trying to get us all to update to in the fall. An initial take on Mac OS especially, but iOS too. The beta versions this year seem much more stable. I feel like the last 2 years, Apple really tried, for what I said before, they were trying to do a lot of stuff to get all their stuff together, and they had to break some things in order to do that. This year, especially since they were also working under the pandemic this last year and doing these features, it seems way quieter. I think that it's going to be a much less disruptive upgrade cycle for people who upgrade in the fall to new versions. I think if the first betas are any indication, it's going to be a lot less painful than the last couple of years have been. And that'll be a relief to everybody who uses and supports people who use Macs and iPads and iPhones. And that is the end of my thing. So if people have questions, I would love to try to answer them. I don't know if I can, but I can try.
I got a question, Jason. So this machine I'm talking on here is the last of the Big Sur MacBook Pros, and I notice all the other OSs will run all the new OSs, not this one. Requires a bump of 2 years to get up a Mac OS on a MacBook Pro. So they're dropping some on Mac OS only.
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination. They're dropping some older systems and they're dropping some features from Intel, right?
So yes, I noticed that's the second part of the question is, yeah, it all runs on this new stuff, but on the Mac, some of the stuff doesn't run on Intel.
Right, because some of the stuff they're doing, they're probably building with things like the Neural Engine, and it's basically the stuff that they built for the iPhone, and it'll work on Apple Silicon, but it's not going to work on Intel, and they're not going to go back and do the work. And this is what's going to happen, right? Like the next few years, what's going to happen every time is they're going to push the compatibility forward a little bit, drop some systems, and then they're going to introduce some new features, and fewer of those features will work on Intel. And then in 3 years, maybe something like that, 3 or 4 years, they won't support Intel on new OS updates. But I think it'll be a little while, and I think it's going to be a slow process of older systems dropping off and them not putting all of the features in. Not being on the latest. My Mac Mini server is still running Mojave. I mean, not being on the latest is not the end of the world, but the hardware transition, this goes hand in hand. At some point, once you move to a new chip platform, at some point you cut it off and say, that's it, there's no more. And I think we're probably like 3 years out from that. But if you've got a system that was right on the bubble, it might work anyway. I have friends who've run unsupported versions of Mac OS 10 for a while now. There are often are like little patches you can do, and then they actually install and they run. Apple just wanted to cut it and not support it anymore. But it is, yeah, that's gonna keep happening. I think for a while we're gonna see that, because we're in that transitional phase now where they're trying to get everybody off of Intel eventually and onto their own chips.
I wonder if they announced that they're not going to force everybody to go to iOS 15. They're going to allow 14 people to opt out and wait, but still get the security updates. So they might do something on Mac OS, extend the 3 version limit, where they drop new version. It's going to drop. Mojave is going to be dropped in the fall when Monterey comes out.
Yeah, I mean, Apple, compared to its competitors, is pretty good about that. Like Google abandons Android pretty fast, but you're right. I think I sense with that iOS decision that they made in Apple, I sense a willingness to let people step off the upgrade cycle and still get software updates for security reasons. Whether they'll change their policies, I don't know. But the good news is that, even if you can't do Monterey, you could do Big Sur, and Big Sur is going to be updated for a while. And it wouldn't surprise me if some between like Catalina and Big Sur, that those are updated for quite a while, depending on where they cut it in terms of what
less and less features.
Support.
They'll still get a new Safari and a new security update.
Apple did that. Actually, Apple did that with iPhones for a while. There was a period, and they did it actually in the Intel transition the last time, where you end up, I think there's something to be said for the idea that you keep getting the operating system. It just doesn't have the new features, but you still get the security updates and you have the old features, and the new features just aren't there. Instead of leaving you behind on an old version, like there's an argument to be made that that's not a bad way to do it. Is, instead of leaving you completely behind, they bring you along, but you don't get any of the new features. That's, it's a philosophy thing, but there's something to be said for that approach. Like, let people update because you want them on the latest version for security reasons. And they just that's going to happen with Intel Macs, like really fast. We're already seeing it, but it's going to happen next year and probably the year after that, where you're going to be able to update a lot of Intel Macs to the new OS, but they're going to be a whole bunch of features that just don't work.
It's kind of strange. Recently they did an iTunes update for El Capitan, and I went, what? So it could still connect to iOS 14 and do a backup, I guess.
I'm sure there's some legal reasons and also some institutional reasons, or some, stuff they're supporting in education or enterprise or something like that, where they have to make decisions like that. And that also, I like to think about, like, imagine if that was your job. Oh, I work at Apple. Oh, what do you work on? Oh, Mac OS. Oh, that's very exciting. What do you do? I update the 8-year-old software so that it still works with a 10-year-old hardware. It's like, it's a job, but not the most exciting one. But they have to do it, right? Because they do have to support some older stuff.
It's actually real confusing. It's been going on for years, where it pops up on your screen when you hook up a new phone. It says you need an update to connect this phone, and people get I don't want to upgrade the OS. I don't want to do it. No, it's an iTunes update, but they don't expel that out.
Yep.
I don't know why they don't have a better explanation.
So, Jason, do you see a difference in appearance or in philosophy in the post Johnny Ives era?
Oh, I mean, Apple seems to have changed its approach in a few ways. I have a hard time ascribing it to Johnny Ive leaving. I'm not sure how long. Johnny Ive left, but I felt like he already had left. But I don't know. It seemed to me like he was like going back to England and driving, and occasionally he would be in San Francisco and he'd drive down to Cupertino once a week or something like that. There are all these stories about him not being particularly engaged. And I do think that to a certain point in the transition to Tim Cook from Steve Jobs, Johnny Ive was really important in sending a message that Apple wasn't going to change. And so I think they made him an offer he couldn't refuse to stick around for a while. Because I suspect that about the time that Steve Jobs passed away, Johnny Ive was also kind of burned out and done with Apple. And then after Steve Jobs died, I think Apple, I have no proof of this. Just reading between the lines, I think Apple went to Johnny Ive and said, no. What do we have to pay you to keep you around for a period of transition so people don't think that we have completely lost it with Steve and you gone? But I think he was kind of checked out. So how much is Alan Dye involved now as the head of design, and how much of this is him, and does everything he say goes, or does he get pushback? I don't know, but you definitely also Johnny Ive might have changed with the time. So it would be easy for me to point to the iMacs that they come in those 6 colors plus silver and say, aha, look, Johnny Ive always wanted everything to be monochrome and like in the white room and silver aluminum and monochrome, and that's it. And now Apple's doing colors again. So take that. There's obviously been a change, but Johnny Ive's the one who designed the iMac that had the colors in the beginning. So some of it is about fashion and the times, and these things go in cycles. Like Apple keeps adding translucency into the OS. Well, they did that at the beginning of OS 10. And it wasn't very readable, but they persevered for a while, and then they gave up, and they're doing it again, and they may give up, but it's been long enough that I think some of it's more than just the people, I guess would be my answer. It is the people, but it's also just the times and what they think the style is, or what's in fashion in terms of, let's try this for a user interface. So it's hard for me to say that like Alan Dye came in and said, well, finally we can make an orange iMac. But I will say this, something changed, because they made an orange iMac and a blue and a yellow and a green and a purple and a red. And I'm very happy with that. And if you think what's a big deal to make a big computer, I'll just point out, it's not just those 6 plus silver iMacs, it's all the keyboards are color matched, and all the trackpads are color matched, and all the cables are color matched. It's a lot of products that they have to track color by color. Sure. It's not a small decision to do that, and they decided to do it. So they obviously they put their full force behind it. So I don't know. Yes, Apple's design philosophy isn't what it was 5 years ago for sure. I'm not sure whether that's ascribable to any one person coming or going.
Janet has her hand up, and I'd like to point out that John had stopped people's video during the presentation to stop the stuttering on his end, which was important for the recording. But so if you have a question, go ahead and start your video again.
Yes.
Janet has her hand up.
Okay, I can't, my video won't go on yet, but anyway, my question is, one thing I love about the Mac OS is the Finder, and as it gets closer together with iOS, are they going to improve a Finder-like interface for iOS, do you think?
Yeah, so big news for iPad OS 15 is when you copy a file now, a progress bar comes up. I don't know why it took them this long, but it's there now. You actually see a little thing that goes like on the Mac. I don't know. I don't think they're going to dumb down the Finder. I do wonder what the arguments are that people have inside Apple about files, the Files app on the iPad, because it should be a lot better. It should be a lot more like the Finder. I think that it's personally, I think it's silly that you would say, oh, but it's the iPad, we don't need this. It's like, who's using the Files app? Like, if somebody's using the Files app, do you know what they want to do? They want to manage files. Like, if you're going to have a Files app, if you're going to have management of files, just give in. Just give in. You're exiting the magical world of there are no files on the iPad, and you're entering file management. And the Finder, like, Files app is never going to be central to the iPad in the same way that Finder is central to the Mac. But it should be a lot better. It is better than it was, and I'm encouraged by that. But there's a lot more that they need to do there. But yeah, you can like copy files and stuff now and actually see that they're copying, because that was my big frustration with the Files app. Is I would get Also, it wouldn't maintain iPad OS 15. It's beta 1, developer beta 1. It is by far the most stable version of the Files app I've ever used. I log into my local server on my local network. It stays connected. When I copy a file to it or from it, it tells me that it's copying it, and it copies it, and then it's done copying it. This is basic stuff for the Finder, but I've been desperate to have that on the iPad for a while, and it seems like it's going to be there in iPad OS 15. So they're taking some cues from the Finder. It's like the progress bar is like straight out of the Finder. So clearly they're learning very slowly the lessons that the Mac could have taught them 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Next question.
So,
Good to hear.
meanwhile, I just, you're filling in for Leo on Twit coming up. I forgot what day that is.
Oh, that's in a couple weeks.
He's going on vacation.
Yeah, I'm the vacation fill-in for Leo sometimes. Oh, that's in
I think it'll be July 4th, right?
July. It's July 18th.
Oh.
July 18th is when I'm filling in for Leo.
Are you in charge of getting the guests?
I
for
get
that
to
show?
say, I get to suggest.
Choose.
I get to
Excellent.
suggest. If I have suggestions, they try to book them.
So we all invited to the studio that day?
They're not taking people yet. They just opened the studio up. I got to go a couple weeks ago, and it was my first time up there in a year and a half. So, but they're not taking outside guests yet. Studio audience is not yet welcome. Sometime soon. Yes. Al raised his hand, but he has to unmute.
Will there be a 21-inch Mac?
Oh.
No, the 24-inch iMac is it. I think that's the small iMac now. It's not that much bigger than the 4K iMac was. It's because they shrunk down the bezels and stuff. It's not enormous. I mean, I say that as somebody who sits in front of a 27-inch iMac every day. So to me, it seems pretty small, but I think that's as small as the iMac is going to get. Unless you mean like a 21-inch laptop, which also probably not, but you never know. They're at 16 now. I mean, anything's possible. Any other questions?
Apparently, when I stopped everybody's video, I have to send them a request to restart. So
Yes.
if you can't restart, tell me. I just went through the list and I think I invited everybody back to video. We'll see. If I didn't, send me a little chat.
Yeah, Zoom is funny about that. Sometimes you can control it. There's like giving control, and then there's turning it on, and it's a whole thing. Hey there, Lynn, you have to turn on your mic.
You alluded to the 14-inch MacBook Pro that might be on the horizon. Do you have a sense of whether, that's going to happen in the fall or?
Oh, that is the real question. I want to believe that it is going to be, that we're not going to have to wait till October for it. I want to believe that. I don't know what the situation is in the supply chain. I've heard people say, oh, well, they're not going to announce something in the summertime. It's like, they can announce things in the summertime if they want to. If they want to, they literally can announce anything whenever they want. So I hope that it's sooner than that, but the rumors on it are really unclear. So it sounds like, I mean, Apple knows, but it sounds like, I think they intended it to be out around now, and it got pushed back. And then it becomes a question of, do they want to roll something out in July or August? Do they want to wait until the iPhone event or after the iPhone event to do it, when they can really have a big, I mean, think of it this way. Nobody's buying the Intel versions of those laptops, right? I mean, I'm sure they sell some, but like how many can they be selling? Because everybody is waiting for that Apple Silicon version of them. So the sooner they ship that, the better for them, but they have to be able to ship it in. You don't want to waste your product announcement on a product nobody can buy, right? And nobody can pre-order, and then you got to wait. Like the only people who do that are like video game console makers, and I don't understand them and why they do it that way. It's a bad idea. So I'm actually, if I had to put money down, and I'm glad I don't, I would probably say it will happen by Labor Day, because I think they want them out there sooner, but it could very easily be October until they do it. Because I don't know what components are they not getting that allow them to not make them? I don't know the answer there, but by all accounts, they're the next ones up. So it's just a matter of when. So hopefully soon.
Good, thanks.
But they
thanks.
wouldn't have a 14 and a 16, would they?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the idea
What?
is they're going to take the high end 13-inch model. Because remember, there are two 13-inch MacBook Pros. It's very confusing. There's a 13-inch MacBook Air, a 13-inch MacBook Pro with 2 ports that's now an M1. And then there's the 13-inch MacBook Pro that's the higher end one. And the rumor is that that one is going to go to 14 inches and look a lot more like the 16-inch MacBook Pro does, which will be good because we won't have two 13-inch MacBook Pros anymore. That's really good. That's very confusing that there are two different ones, distinctly different. So that's the thought, is that what they did for the 16-inch, where they took the 15-inch, changed it, shrunk the bezels a little bit, and made it, squeezed a bigger screen in there, that they're going to do that with the high-end 13-inch too.
Went to order a SSD upgrade for somebody off Amazon yesterday and can't get it for a week. Best Buy doesn't have it till July 1st. So there's definitely some shortages going on.
Yeah, there's disruption in the supply chain. And what Apple says is that it's not even like Apple buys so much stuff in advance. They line it all up. It sounds like what's really happening here is there are these parts that everybody uses. They're in everything. They're in every PC. They're maybe in every TV. And they're common parts, but now they're hard to come by. And some of Apple's computers, especially the Macs and I think some of the iPads, use those components. Not the iPhones, apparently, but the Macs especially. And so I think what's ended up happening is you end up having computers that can't be built, not because of all the expensive components, but because of some little cheap component that suddenly is just not available because they stopped that factory and they've got to fulfill now after they've started it back up, and everybody wants it because all of their devices are waiting for that part. And it's a real, for a want of a nail kind of situation, but it could be like for the want of a Thunderbolt controller or a Bluetooth chip or something that they can't launch the laptops on when they want to. But it's a weird time. A friend of mine is building a little addition to his home office, and he had to buy lumber for that, and the lumber costs a fortune too. So there's a lot of pain in various supply chains right now that'll take some time to smooth out.
Seems crazy that car manufacturing has been slowed for lack of electronic components.
Them too. Yeah, that's right. It's the same. I think it's a lot of the same stuff. Tim Cook called them legacy nodes, which is the just weirdest inside baseball term that I've heard in a long time. But the idea there is basically like there's old parts that still everybody needs because they haven't replaced them with a new part. And you kind of use those old parts, assuming that they're just freely available. They're just a completely fungible part. It's like a boring electronic part, like how many you want, we can get them for you, not a problem. And then they're gone. And everybody wants them. And yeah, cars is another good example where we don't think necessarily of cars as computers, but they are. They've got lots of computers in them. And so, yeah, imagine like literally everybody who makes anything wants those parts, and there aren't enough of them. And Apple is just one voice. And what Tim Cook said on their quarterly financial results call is Apple really likes to plan ahead and control what it can control. But the stuff that's limiting them now is not stuff they control. It's stuff that is just kind of out there and that suddenly has dried up. And Apple works with a little bit of a backlog, but they said last quarter they shipped everything that they could, but they've blown through their backlog now. So they've lost their cushion. And I think that's why there weren't any laptops announced this month.
You think that'll drive manufacturers, including Apple, to their own manufacturing chains as opposed to everything being part of out there?
Apple is already pretty much obsessed with controlling everything. So I think this is just going to confirm to Apple that like there was probably an argument. So let's say, I don't know what it was, but let's say it's a Thunderbolt controller. There's probably an argument that happened at Apple that was like, well, should we build a Thunderbolt controller and pay Intel and build it into our chip design or should we just get the cheap Thunderbolt controller and stick it on the board and it's fine? And they're like, yeah, let's just go with the cheap one. And that person is like, there's a new meeting, and now they're like, see, I told you, we can't do that. Let's not do that. So I think there'll be a lot of those. I think Apple already has this inclination to do that kind of thing. And then it's mostly the result is, well, yeah, but it's so much cheaper to just use this part. Let's just use this part. But I think this will embolden the people inside Apple who are like, we need to control even more than we controlled before. And that's a very Apple thing. Other companies may do it too, but I think Apple is perhaps the most extreme example of wanting to control that stuff. And they've got the money to do it. That's because a lot of it comes down to money. A lot of it comes down to paying the factory and saying, you know, we're going to write you a big check for you to give us the first tens of thousands of that you make. And everybody else has to wait. Apple likes to do that.
Didn't Steve Jobs, before he died, kind of go crazy over the inventory thing and insisted that Apple get down to a 7-day inventory? And I'm wondering if maybe they shot themselves in the foot with that philosophy.
Well,
if
I
they're
mean,
still adhering to it.
They used to have an enormous inventory, and it was a big expense for them because you leave old computers sitting around, and then you've got to liquidate them when you replace them, and they're just sitting there depreciating. And if you have to cut the price, then they're worth less than they were when you made them. And I mean, it was a problem. And Tim Cook is the guy who they brought in to fix that. And Tim Cook made his name on reducing their inventory to be as just in time as possible. That said, everybody does it this way. This is why there's so much supply chain disruption. It's everything is just in time. Everything is trying to minimize the amount of stuff that's kept in a warehouse somewhere. You don't want inventory because inventory costs money, and it's a way to save money. Post-pandemic, yeah, I think a bunch of companies are going to have some thoughts about what the issues are with just-in-time manufacturing versus keeping more inventory, and different industries may react differently, but I don't think it's limited to Apple. Like, everybody is really feeling that. And Apple's pretty savvy. Like, Apple has a pretty good gauge on what supply and demand is, and they generally make what they need to and stop making. There was a report this week about how they stopped making the iPhone 12 mini not because they're discontinuing it. I mean, they will in the fall, and there's supposedly another mini coming in the fall, but they discontinued manufacturing of it this week because they've made enough. And that's because they know how many they're going to sell between now and when they discontinue it. And they're really sophisticated about it. But yeah, something like this pandemic, I'm sure it gives them pause. But everybody's kind of in the same boat there. Like, that's actually just how a lot of industries work now, is that same philosophy.
Thanks.
I remember we went to the Sacramento G4 tower assembly plant on a tour with the group. And there was all these semis backed up to the factory floor with parts in them that Apple didn't own until they took them off the truck. And they went from the truck and got plugged into the assembly line like within minutes.
Yeah,
that's been going on for a long time.
Manufacturing is a pretty wacky,
It was really strange.
Business. Ask Tim Cook about manufacturing. He'll tell you all about it, I'm sure. It's his favorite thing. Any other questions?
Good. All good.
All right.
Do you have thoughts about Siri development? Because Siri does get better, but it still seems to me it lags way behind what Google can do, and maybe even what Amazon is doing.
I actually think they're on the right track now. They hired a couple of years ago a guy from Google to run that group. Siri is, more than just the voice assistant. There's a bunch of stuff. Shortcuts is part of the Siri group, right? Like, they're trying to think big picture about sort of on-device intelligence. I'd say the biggest step forward in Siri in a long time is that with iOS 15 and macOS Monterey, they're doing on-device voice control. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen much faster because they're going to be able to process it on the device instead of sending the audio file over the internet and processing it remotely. And that is a place where Apple was just kind of behind the competition that was much faster than it was. So I'd say their stuff is getting faster and smarter. It's true. They're behind Google and Amazon, and they seem to be, I was going to say they seem to be catching up. I'm not sure they're catching up, but they seem to be doing a lot better. And that's who can say. It's actually kind of hard to gauge how good Siri is, because Siri can be good or bad for depending on what day it is and what question you ask it. But I think it's getting better, and that's an encouraging sign. But it's still not, it's the updates this fall are going to make it better, but it's still not good enough, and they still have more work to do. And I think if they were candid, if Apple was candid with you, they know that, and they've been working on it for a few years, but they got a long way to go, a lot of catch up to play there, and their competitors are continuing to advance.
You have any thoughts on Apple Watch battery?
Apple Watch battery, that it's bad, that it's good, that it's the rumors are that the next Apple Watch is going to actually be slightly thicker than the current one. So I don't know. I think Apple must think that it's good enough for them to do the always on display. They're optimizing for sort of 1 day's use. The older the watch gets, the worse the battery life is. I don't know. Is there anything in particular about Apple Watch battery?
Well, I've been recording mine for a month, and some days it's 100% at 7 and 13% at 9 in the morning.
Well, that's not good. That's very strange. I haven't seen anything like that. What? Yeah, I mean,
I have a case with them, and I'm just getting enough information to continue with it.
Yeah, that it's possible that something strange is going on there, because I've heard people talk about weird things with their Apple Watch battery, and because that if it's reporting those right, so batteries are chemical things; they're not digital, and when they get represented digitally by things like a percentage, I understand why they do it. It's like a user-friendly thing, but it's actually misleading. So what's really happening is that the power output from that battery is varying widely, and that's why it's showing you that. Because obviously, a battery is not discharging from 100% to 17% in a couple of hours. But what's happening is something is probably chemically wrong with the battery, or something is wrong with the way that the watch is measuring it. So yeah, be in conversation with Apple about it. I've had a pretty good experience with Apple Watch batteries, other than using beta software, or actually updating it, because my battery life on my watch was terrible when I updated to the latest version of watchOS last fall, and I ended up restoring it from a backup, and wiping it and restoring it, and it solved the problem. So sometimes that also happens, where the Apple Watch is just, it's so small and the battery is so small that one little runaway software something can murder the battery. So, but I'm sorry that you're having problems.
Restoring worked for about 4 days for me, and then the troubles came
Wow.
back.
Yeah.
There's no app on the watch like there is on the phone showing you what app is using all the energy.
No, and it's supposed to kill that stuff really aggressively, but something is going on there. That's that's unusual, but it doesn't help me say if it's a problem, it's still a problem, whether it's unusual or not.
When we had that COVID tracker app, I noticed that was just wiping my battery out. So I just recently, it was still running, and I never got any notices. I uninstalled the thing because it was like killing my, really as the biggest battery sucker on the whole phone.
All right.
So if you still have that, it's not really necessary anymore. It didn't really ever do anything.
Well, I have a deadline, so I am going to go write an article. And
all right, Jason.
Thank you all for being here. And
thanks again, and we'll be looking for you on the 18th on twit.tv.
Sure. Please do. I'll be there. It'll just be me, and hopefully people will come and be my guests. Otherwise, I'm going to have to talk for 2 hours, and I'd rather not. So thank you all
say
again.
Hi to the Unbreakable.
Sorry to not see you in person again, but Zoom's okay, and I didn't have to drive, so that's nice. And I'll see you next time. We'll do this again sometime.
All right.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
So we'll keep the recording going if anybody has any general questions. So we got some time. If not, we'll kill the recording and move to food porn.
Before you do that, let me repeat what I mentioned before the meeting about this special. if anybody is looking for the iPad Pro 11-inch model with the M1 chip, Sam's Club today has the 128 gig model for $699 until the end of the day.
It's Prime Day, but everybody else is competing. Target has
Yeah.
deals, Walmart has deals.
Yeah, but this is the best price I've seen.
So let me ask you a question about that. So I see that the iPad 8th generation 128 sells for about $400. It's $400 at Costco. It's $5 less than that on Amazon.
That's not the Pro.
It's not the Pro, but it's half the price. And I'm wondering what you lose by not getting the Pro model. I mean, how much difference? I mean, why would you need the Pro or the Air, which are significantly more expensive?
I think it's got a better screen. And I'm not sure if the Air is an M1 or not, is it?
No,
I
it's
think
not.
so.
Yeah, so it's Intel, where the Pro is an M1. It's going to be more compatible for a longer time. And I have the first generation of the iPad Pro, and I use that thing every single day. In fact, I told my daughter, I was down visiting her on Father's Day. I said, I would sooner lose my laptop than lose my iPad.
Why? In what way?
I just use it all the time. I find it so useful for everything. I do the bulletin board on it. I do email on it. I browse the internet with it. I stay abreast of news with it. I just find it to be the most useful electronic device I own. The most useful.
Rick, let me ask you a question. You have, is that a Wi-Fi
Yes,
only?
I have a telephone, so I don't need the cell. If I want to make a telephone call, if my phone's anywhere in the house here, I can just say, hey, SIRI, call my daughter or call so-and-so on the iPad. It makes the phone call for me. If my cell phone rings and it's not with me here in the house, it'll ring on my iPad, as it does on my iMac as well and my MacBook Pro. So no, I wouldn't spend the money on an iPad with cell service. That is an ongoing expense of what, about another 10 or 20 bucks a month? And I don't think
You
more, I
also
think.
get a GPS. So if you're going to use it for maps in the car with you can't do that without the GPS.
But if I have my phone with me, can't I use the
You
phone and then use maps on the iPad in the car?
No, because the iPad doesn't have a GPS.
Okay. But I got GPS built into
Yeah,
my
the
car.
cellular model has a GPS on the iPad. And if you
Yeah.
don't get the cell model, you don't get the GPS feature.
And right now in the education store, I see that Apple has an offer of $200 rebate if you get the cellular model. And the offer varies exactly how it works depending on what carrier. So that would pay for the difference in the price plus the cellular service for a little while. And
Additionally, I use consumer cellular, and I'm not sure consumer cellular can use the iPad. I'm not sure. I've never even asked.
Usually they're $30 a month.
I think it's $10 a month for Jeep.
Yeah, the cell service on the iPad, on the iPhone, I mean on the iPad, is not expensive.
I think it's $10 a month at T-Mobile.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
And
it's
The thing is,
AT&T also.
there's no contract. You can turn it on and off on the iPad anytime you want per month. So you could go on a trip, turn it on for a month, and then turn it off.
got a question on Apple TV. Does anybody with an Apple TV had intermittent blackouts on it?
I haven't had any problems.
No.
I don't have one.
So you don't have a problem with it?
What do you mean by intermittent blackouts?
It'll run for an hour, then it'll black out for 10, 15, 20 seconds, come back on, run a bit, black out again. While it's blacked out, it's unresponsive. Can't go to the home screen.
I've never
So I took
seen
it
that.
down to Apple. Of course, I wiped it first and they couldn't diagnose it because wiping it wipes the diagnostics.
Oh,
So now I have to hook it back up and repeat it. And they
Oh.
were, well, my local Apple store is probably the least friendly one I've ever been in. Everything is an argument, a fight with them.
that sounds familiar. That's,
Yeah, like Walnut Creek.
yeah. I stay out of that place. I haven't been in the new store at all, but
Well, I took in an iPhone with a swollen battery. They accused me of tampering with it.
Oh, geez. Well, it's good to see Jim Hansen.
Hey, Jim.
oh yeah, there he is.
Jim, we do this every week. Usually we
Yeah.
go to 5 o'clock. Jason was pretty
Really?
fast talker.
You know, I look at the pictures on Facebook every once in a while, and the group gets smaller and smaller, and I recognize less and less people.
Nobody uses our stuff, the DVMUG stuff on Facebook at all.
Yeah, well.
You know, Jason's full of information. I mean, that was some real detailed stuff that he pulled out.
Oh, yeah. He's the best presenter ever.
Yeah, he's very good.
Does he live in the Bay Area?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
lives in Marin,
It is in Mill Valley.
Mill Valley.
He probably lives in that spaceship, Apple spaceship there in the middle, in between all those trees.
Yeah, that's in Santa Clara County.
Yeah, he's local. He can drive up to the Twit studio and he was in person last week or the week before, and he's gonna substitute for Leo, and it'll probably be an all Apple show. He'll probably get Andy and Nako in there. And
The trouble with Twit and on all his shows, a lot of good information, but there's no way to not have to sit through tons of commercials.
they
And
only
I've
have
lost
them
my
Oh, there's no commercials except the ones he reads on the internet, on the video.
He does typically, he'd like to do in a 2-hour show 3 commercials, and they're kind of run long. Sometimes he doesn't get to it.
Well,
This week in Mac Break Weekly, they only had 1.
Yeah, if you listen on KFI, although you won't get KFI in San Francisco, but it's going to be riddled with commercials.
Oh, with Twit, they take commercial breaks all the time. Mac Break Weekly and This Week in Tech, no, they don't. That's not a radio program, so that's a different
Right.
story.
Janet has her hand up.
Thank you. I've listened to Leo on a podcast. How is that the same place that Jason would be?
No,
Or what,
Well,
where
you
do
can
see
watch it
Twit?
live. It's Sunday. They usually get started about 2:15 for
No.
the pre-show. And so the URL is live.twit.tv.
No, it's twit.tv live.
No, it's live.twit.tv.
And he comes on at 11 in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays.
That's for the talk show. That's the radio
Yeah.
show. That does have a lot of commercials. But if you
Not so
listen
much.
live on the web,
See you,
when there's a
Jim.
when there's a commercial radio break, you
Have a
don't hear
comment.
that. You hear him talking offline continue to talk with the callers or gabbing with other, you don't hear those commercials.
Twit is.
Radio,
trying to
you hear
restructure,
those
so-
constant.
Oh, yeah, on the radio, but not on
radio,
the
you're-
live part.
No, he doesn't.
Jim, what are you trying to say?
Twit's kind of restructuring, so he's selling memberships now, which will give you an ad-free, but he's needing to
Right.
Right,
support himself with ads
recording.
otherwise.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
and you
signed
get-
up for that just so that we could look at his Discord setup.
I tried it during his radio show last week. It's just chat. And there wasn't that many people in there. It was like a dozen people. It wasn't very interesting. They still run the IRC chat, which is free. That was nuts. That's like rapid fire.
Yeah. You can't read it. It's so fast.
I
Sometimes.
used to try to do that when I first started 10 years ago, to watch that at the same time. It's like, I don't know how those people do that.
So how many people here have multiple screens?
Didn't you ask that last week? And there was,
How many people have multiple computers?
Who doesn't?
Well, running at the same time. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 CPUs running right now, 3 screens, KVM with 3 machines on it. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, when I'm talking about a Mac with 2 screen, 2
Yeah,
displays.
Jim's got
So-
2 behind his head.
Well, it's an iMac Pro and a 5K monitor.
But you're facing away from them.
Well, actually, they aren't running right now.
He's got more than one computer around, I suspect.
That's right. And you know, I'm kind of running off a MacBook Air Intel.
Now,
And
you left Portland.
not yet. I'm in the process.
You're still in the process. Where are you going?
Going back to Michigan.
Ah,
So I've had it with Portland, but
And the
11
reason-
years is enough.
The reason I ask is because when you run Zoom with a 2-monitor setup, you have all sorts of options, but automatically you get speaker view and gallery view on the 2 monitors side by side. But when you run a display, when you're running a video or some kind of screen sharing, the screen sharing replaces one of them, and the other you still have a choice of gallery view or speaker view. It's really great. It's a much deeper and more immersive experience just by plugging a second monitor in.
well, Lee's got the laptop and the iPad going. That sort of accomplishes the same thing. And
It does.
today I logged in with my laptop, with my iPad. I took it out to the breezeway so that I could still hear Jason when I wanted to go prep my roast beef supper. So
Not that.
They got the roast beef back in stock.
no, I had to go to Nob Hill. Safeway is not selling cross rib roast anymore, and it's pissed me off. So I went to Nob Hill, and I've got my potatoes peeled and my carrots roasted and my mushrooms ready.
in Southern California, they call it a shoulder clawed roast. So it may be Safeway. I don't buy meat at Safeway, but maybe Safeway's changed their nomenclature.
No,
No?
I would recognize a cross rib roast when I saw one,
Yeah.
no matter what it was called.
I used to shop at Vaughn's in Santa Monica, and I asked, where's the cross rib roast? I don't see any. Oh, we got them here, but we call them shoulder clawed.
Shoulder clawed?
That's
Yeah.
a terrible name.
That is a terrible name.
Of course, that was quite a few years ago, maybe almost 50 years ago.
Yeah, Linda Castleton, I see you figured out how to turn your video on. You got to unmute yourself if you want to
Not
talk.
the
though. You have
audio.
to-
Hold the space bar down, Linda, to talk.
Okay,
Yay, yeah.
Yeah.
Gotta keep holding
I
it.
can't figure out how you write a message, like when you're saying, goodbye, folks, I'm leaving. Because
It's in chat. There's a button, there's a chat button on the bar on the bottom under the people's pictures. Chat.
I don't see chat on the bottom of my picture.
Are you on a phone? Are you on a
No, I'm
computer?
just on my MacBook Pro. That's all I've got.
So down at the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says chat. Right in the center.
It should say participants, chat, share screen, record, and reaction.
It's right
Move-
down at
So
the
if you
bottom
press
of the
chat, a
screen.
window opens.
Move your
Just
cursor
move-
down
move your
there.
mouse
Yeah.
down.
Cursor over it or she
You have
won't
to
see
you
it.
have to move the mouse over to show it. It drops down unless you mouse over it.
Oh, it's hidden.
But that's also a setting. You can, in the settings, you can choose not to have it. Those things disappear. There's some control says something like show always. Where is it here?
Under view.
You're muted, Linda.
Yeah, on the bottom left of that bar, there's also a mute button. You can check that to unmute so you don't have to hold the space bar.
All right, I did it. Thank
There you
you.
go.
No, you guys are way ahead of me. I'm still trying to master the basics on
Oh,
one computer.
Remember, we all started in the same spot.
Well,
You'll get it.
I don't know. Thank you.
Well, you got your lighting figured out better than I do.
I don't know about that.
Mine's a hot mess.
I like the kitty that usually sits on your bed.
Oh yeah, it's too warm for her to go there right now. I think she's probably lounging on the bathroom floor because of the cold
On the
tile.
tub. The tub's
so
nice and
Ann-
cool.
And I don't
And you've
see,
got stripes from the blinds on you too.
Yeah, and they're closed as far as they can go.
Yeah, I was
I'm
just
waiting
gonna-
for the moire patterns to start.
I was gonna say, no more outer space lights on you. Oh.
Well, I never tweaked my Zoom setup because I figured, oh, we're not going to be doing this forever. But here we are. We're doing this forever.
The new normal.
I may have to like go shopping or something. Like John's got his whiteboard covering his window.
Yeah.
Mine would not look nearly that tacky, I can assure you.
So yours,
Well, hey, you know.
so yours is, you're just lit by window light right now?
Well, no, the shade is, it's, the
There's
vertical
the light.
lines. And here, I'll try and turn them the other way.
There you go.
There you go.
You don't sit there. That's what you normally do.
No,
And then you
now
got
I just get the holes.
the dots.
No.
That's what I usually have is the
That's okay.
dot situation. That's better. That works better.
Go away from the light.
So do you have a desk lamp? Do you have a regular table lamp that you can set?
No,
next
there's
to
not
you?
really room for a table lamp here. My computer is literally up against the window. And
There may be a floor lamp next to your desk or your table.
no, there's a UPS right there. And then there's no.
Well, compare Ann's picture with, say, Kostrovsky. He's completely in the
The
dark.
big
And
news is that
Ann's got a good
his
picture.
lights off.
The
His
shadow
harsh
mode.
lighting. You always got to remember to remind him to turn his light on. Bruce, turn your light on.
Oh, boy.
You still got much better lighting, Ann.
Your lighting is
Yeah,
fine.
your lighting's fine.
Yeah,
It's better than Rick's. Rick's got windows behind his head
yeah.
that he can't do anything about.
Well,
And every talking head on TV is wearing makeup. You know that, right?
Yeah.
If you don't like your flesh tone, then go put your powder on.
Well, Kenji,
I'd rather deal with a blue
Lately,
flesh tone.
Yeah.
Kenji, lately I've seen some real doozies out there without makeup or whatever kind of makeup they didn't put on because man, that is not professional at all.
Yeah.
That light didn't do any good. But things are what they are.
Yeah, I know. I see people
Well, if
that
it's-
that are on cable news every single day from home, and they've never gotten their setup together. It's just a terrible background, or some of them look great. Some of them just look awful. Bad lighting.
Channel 2 is particularly bad. They got some bad equipment. They should spring for some better stuff. Channel 5 is losing lots of their people. People had a belly full.
Well, I must say, I went to the Monterey Bay Aquarium on Saturday, my first outing, and it was too crowded for me. I was feeling
Comfortable with it. Yeah.
very uncomfortable.
By the we're still recording, by the way.
I see
Yeah.
that. We can probably stop that.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah. Bye to the recording.
Does
Bye,
anybody
guys.
gallery view? Hold on, I
Bye-bye.
go to gallery view.
But we'll still keep talking.
There we go. Okay, we'll stop.